If there's one thing that moving country is guaranteed to do, it's guaranteed to get you thinking about your material possessions. I've been back in Ireland for coming up on 5 weeks now, and a lot of my stuff is still in boxes because the house is already full of stuff, and we're kind of in the process of making changes and moving furniture and getting rid of some things, and it's all taking a long time. It's quite stressful. I'm still living in chaos, and it really has gotten me back to thinking about minimalism and my relationship to the physical objects that I own, and it's making me wish, honestly, that I could just get rid of a lot of the things that I own. I'm not really in a position to do that because I've already pared back my belongings so much that I'm kind of at an impasse. Where if I were to really want to get rid of a lot of my stuff at this point, I would have to be breaking into categories of things that I have previously decided that I wanted to hold on to. Predominantly books and items that I relate in some way, shape or form to my spirituality, to my spiritual practice, whether they're things that are on my altar or not. I've mentioned this in my minimalism video, I think, that I tend to have items all around the room. I'm just looking around and seeing lots of them now, like way beyond the altar and the things that are still packed away in boxes. I tend to only really hold on to the kind of knickknacks and statuettes and things like that that I relate in my head in some way to my spirituality, and sometimes I make it onto my altar and other times they're just kind of around the room. So those two categories take up a large portion of the kind of stuff that I own. Clothes then being another, and then kind of materials for creating art and so on, and you know, digital stuff that again I am quite attached to, that I use, that I find a lot of value in, like cameras and laptops and computers and so on. But I have been thinking, I've been rethinking my relationship to, well, my books as well, but I feel like that's a whole other video maybe. But I have been rethinking my relationship to my spiritual items. Because when I moved back here first, one of the first things I did was I unpacked part of my altar, and I didn't have space to set up as big of an altar as I had back in Edinburgh. I had to set up just kind of a small altar space, and this was supposed to just be a temporary thing, and at the time I was thinking, oh, this isn't great, it's not ideal, I'm going to miss having this bigger space, I'm going to miss the tools that I don't have out on my altar, you know, until I can have that larger space and be able to unpack everything. And the funny thing is that I haven't really missed them at all. I recently read a book by the Minimalists. I've been reading it over the past week, and because I've been thinking a lot about my material possessions, it got me thinking about the Minimalists again. And I hadn't read this book before. It's one of their books. It's basically Joshua Fields Millburn's memoir of his minimalism experience, his journey to minimalism. It's called Everything That Remains, and I really enjoyed it. I found it to be a very, very enjoyable read. I think it's the one of their books that has kind of the highest rating, generally speaking, from reviews. It's nicely written, it's got a good flow to it, his voice really comes across in it, and it's just very readable and enjoyable and relatable, I think, and has a good kind of combination of philosophy with kind of his real life and memories, and it's just a kind of a nice introduction potentially to minimalism if you're not familiar. But it got me thinking again about the concept of, well, it was basically how the other member of the Minimalists, Ryan Nicodemus, how he entered into minimalism was by throwing a packing party where he packed up all of his possessions into boxes, covered up all his furniture, and then for the next 21 days would take out anything that he needed or anything that he wanted to use, and after 21 days, anything that he had not taken out of those boxes or not uncovered, the furniture that he hadn't uncovered, he got rid of, essentially. And that really got me thinking about my move back here, and it made me wonder, if I had only taken out the things that I actually was going to use and that I actually really wanted out of those boxes, how much of that stuff would I have actually taken out and how much of it would still be there? To some extent, that is how it's actually happened, and I'm at a point now where I feel like the things that are still in those boxes, I'm wondering to myself, do I really need them if they're still in the boxes? And some of that stuff is not so surprising. It's just bits and pieces that were useful to me maybe back in Edinburgh that are not useful to me over here. So that's not so much of a surprise. But what has surprised me is the spiritual stuff. because that's still in boxes. And despite the fact that there isn't space on my altar, I would expect maybe that I might have taken things out even just to use them. And I haven't missed them. And it's really making me wonder about the value that we place in our material spiritual objects, and to what extent we really do need them, and to what extent we even really use them. Maybe some of you are better at having a material practice than I am, especially if you are kind of more into witchcraft and so on, if you actually are casting spells and that kind of thing, then you are quite probably using your items more than I am. But I definitely find that I use my items, my spiritual items, relatively little. This is kind of a topic that has been covered ad nauseum in this community, and I really do applaud everyone for getting into this topic of the question of the materialism of witchcraft and paganism. And I feel like over the years we've gradually talked about this more, become more self-conscious about it, wondered more about our relationship to consumerism and how our spirituality relates to that. We've asked questions about candles and what we should burn and whether we should burn them, and plastic knickknacks and all that kind of stuff, and whether our practice really should need these material things in the first place. I do think it's an interesting conversation. That's not where I'm going to go necessarily with this video, because it's a minefield, but it's definitely something that as I've forayed more and more into minimalism, into the concepts of minimalism over the years, without necessarily going kind of full blown into it myself, it is something that I have wondered about again and again. And I think it's something that I have moved away from largely. There was a time in the not too distant past when I would take any opportunity possible to walk into a kind of spiritual store and to purchase crystals or other kind of knickknacks for the altar, other tools for the altar. And I think I kept thinking that if I bought these things, that I would magically start using them, that I would magically start, I shouldn't use the word magically, that's going to be confusing in this context, that I would just automatically start to use them, that I would find a use for them, that I would suddenly have a practice that was a lot more exciting and that incorporated a lot of different tools and a lot of different practices, just because I had these new items. And I just wanted to be able to create very beautiful altars and so on. I definitely got to a point, I think, where I purchased everything that I needed. I will say, in terms of the crystals, which were what I dropped the most money on, I absolutely still do have them on my altar, and they are a main part of my altar. When I was setting up the altar that I have, the kind of small altar that I have up here, I really just pared it down to the primary symbols that are most important to me, and those kind of larger tumbled stones are really central to the symbolism on my altar. They mark out the wheel of the year for me, and I really, really enjoy having that on my altar. So I have no regrets in terms of purchasing most of those items. It's more that I'm kind of realizing how much that I have been expecting a certain type of spirituality from myself. That I have been, because I have been in this community that is very kind of focused around witchcraft and ceremonial magic, or at least inspired by that kind of sphere, I think I've had this expectation that in order for me to be doing my spirituality properly, it must involve a lot of stones and beads, prayer beads, and singing bowls and candles and burning things and lighting things on fire and, cutting rope and all sorts of stuff like that. This is not to say that doing those things isn't valuable to me, because I definitely go through periods where it is, and sometimes in ritual I will, do things like that. I will incorporate something more material into my practice. But over the last week I've been thinking a bit about how I go through phases of really kind of categorizing my spirituality as very, very separate to the rest of my life. And inevitably I tend to always come back to feeling like I want to kind of marry the two more, and that I don't want to maintain this kind of separation in my mind between what is spiritual in my life and what isn't. Because I think it actually comes from a place of fear. I think it comes from a place of feeling like if I were to drop all of those extra kind of practices, if I were to have an altar that wasn't as lavish and wasn't as filled with beautiful objects, that I would in some way slip away from my core beliefs, that I would slip away from the magical feeling that I get when I contemplate a divine universe. And I just don't really think that that's true. And I think that I need to work maybe on having it the other way around and having my practice be a reflection of the way that I live my life and the way that I feel in my entire life about my place in cosmos. So another thing that I've been thinking about a lot in the past few weeks is just how I'm spending my life in general right now. I'm about to turn 31, which is kind of terrifying to me, because essentially it feels like my young years are sort of half over. I have this kind of deadline in my head of age 40, because like even though I'm absolutely single, I still have a hope that like maybe hopefully I will meet a partner, a long-term partner at some point, and I would really love to have a child with them, if things pan out that way, touch wood. That's kind of that's the dream, that's what I'm hoping for in my life. But for that to happen, there has to come a point where I have to stop living this kind of airy-fairy life where I don't earn any money and that I kind of have the freedom to go where I want and do what I want. So I kind of have this cut-off point in my mind of kind of my late 30s, before which I have to do all the things that you do when you're young and do all the things that I had hoped that I would do when I was young. Because obviously, if I were to have the opportunity to have a child, then that would be a chunk of my life that would be much more focused on kind of domesticity and the family and, you know, raising a child, and it would make me a lot more rooted and have a lot more responsibilities and so on. And yeah, because I'm like already turning 31 in a couple of weeks, and by the time I'm done with my PhD, and so by the time that I can really be earning in any serious way, I'm going to be 32. It started getting me kind of a little bit panicked, and it started to make me realise that I am not set up to be kind of doing the things that I want to be doing right now. And I really, if I want to start being the person that I thought that I would be at this age, I need to start right now, and I just need to do it and get out of my comfort zone. And some of that is relating to my creative output, my output in general. Some of it relates to what I'm doing as Anya Orga. It relates to just kind of getting my ass in gear and getting my new website up and running and trying new things out in terms of the kind of content that I create and so on. Writing the ebooks that I want to write, or e-courses, or whatever it is that I decide that I want to do. Part of it relates to writing fiction, and even just other creative endeavors like recording the songs that I've written. Like I want to set myself up to be able to do very rough recordings of my songs, not to do anything in particular with, but just because that's something that I've always wanted to do. But a really important part of all of this has been a realization that I always thought that I would be a person who traveled a lot when she was young. And I'm not gonna lie, this is a bad time. It's a bad point in the history of humanity to be thinking about suddenly starting to travel more. I am fully aware of how hyper-conscious we have to be at this point about our carbon footprint and about how much air travel we're doing, and I loathe to be encouraging anyone, including myself, to be flying more than I have been, especially when I've had to be flying back and forth to Edinburgh quite a lot over the past 4 years as well. But the reality is that I have always assumed that I would travel a lot and that I would see other places and have all these kind of multiple different types of experiences, and the fact of the matter is I haven't travelled to a new place apart from Edinburgh, haven't travelled to a new place in 11 years, which, as somebody who grew up with her parents travelling quite a lot with her, I think I had been to something like 17 or 20 countries by the time I was 20. It hasn't sat well with me that I have had to let those 11 years pass. Not had to, but I chose to let those 11 years pass without having kind of new experiences. Now, I will say that my ideal way in my mind of seeing new places is to go and live in them. I don't really like the idea of kind of just going on very short trips to different places and moving around a lot and flying a lot in one trip. That's always been my dream, would be that I would be able to spend maybe say 3 months of the year going to another part of the world, living there, and then maybe traveling from there. So I've always wanted to live in Berlin ever since I first went there, maybe how many years ago, I don't know, a lot of years ago. And so that's kind of one thing that I've realized I really want to make happen in the next couple of years. I want to be able to move to Berlin for 3 or 6 months, and you know, I can travel from there because I can easily hop on a train from Berlin and go to other parts of mainland Europe. So how does this relate to my altar, to my spirituality, you might be asking? Well, that's the thing. I had this realization in the past week that my relationship to travel and my desire to see new things and new places is actually connected to my spirituality, because the feeling that I have, that I really want to have more of when I go to a new place, or especially when I go to a big city, I actually do think of it as being akin to the kind of sense of reverence and awe that I have when I'm, say, out in nature, standing on top of a mountain, you know, looking out to sea. It's inspired by very different things, but it is still a very kind of reverential, transpersonal type experience for me. So, for example, I absolutely adore London. London is one of those places that I think, not that you either love it or hate it, I definitely know some people who can take it in small doses, but not everyone has the kind of like I say, almost spiritual kind of experience as I do when I go to London or other cities like London. There is something to me about being in a city of that scope, where there is just such a combination of different cultures, different types of people, different types of buildings and architecture, different periods of time all clashing together, and a constant kind of sensation that everything is changing, everything is moving on so fast. There are just so many people coming and going. There's a sense of just infinite possibility, and it just excites me and enlivens me so much. And it kind of makes me feel really positive about humanity. And that might sound strange as somebody who is, you know, very much concerned about the environmental crisis and so on. I'm very much concerned about carbon emissions, and you would think that maybe being in the middle of a huge city might remind me of the extent of those carbon emissions, but that's not what I get from a city. What I get from a city is this sense of amazement about how we have evolved and what we've managed to achieve as humans, and I just see the positive sides of that. And so what I've been thinking then with all of this is that I think I want to start thinking about the ways in which I can enact my spirituality on a day-to-day basis, and in ways that seem sort of secular or mundane, rather than limiting it to just sitting at the altar and having specific kind of spiritual practices. Because as a pantheist, to me, I am enacting my spirituality just by living and breathing. I am connecting to the divine cosmos by doing anything that I do in my day-to-day life, by connecting to the outside world, and by really living. Like, that is the best way for me to feel reverent and to feel connected to the outside world, to the rest of humanity, to the rest of cosmos. So I'm really kind of trying to go forth and kind of shape and build my life the way that I kind of always wanted it to look, and to keep in mind always that I don't want to be kind of relegating my spiritual experience to the altar. I don't want that to be the only home. I want it to be the hub, and I want it to be the reflection of who I am as a spiritual person, but I want to spend a lot more time thinking about how the other things that I do in my life reflect my sense of my spirituality, my sense of the cosmos as being divine, and to get really excited about that, to really live that and own that, and to not be shy of it. And to remember that I can go anywhere and do anything and be having a spiritual experience and feel connected to divinity. I don't need anything in particular. I don't need all these kind of crystals and candles and pretty things and statuettes and so on in order to feel that and to live that. And sure, these things can be very evocative. They can be very inspiring to us symbolically. A lot of us have been raised to associate certain sights and certain smells with a sense of devotion, and that's not a negative thing. But I'm definitely feeling this desire to move away a little bit from those kind of trinkets and from those, to me right now, slightly limiting symbols of my spirituality, and feel more like I'm living it day to day, and not just through going on walks in nature because that's what's expected of us as pagans and as alternative spiritual people, but through my interactions with other people, through being in a city, through traveling, through creating art or music or writing or anything. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I had to say on the topic. Do let me know your thoughts below, and yeah, I think I'm going to make a video soon about my altar again, so I think I'm going to talk about this a bit more because I'm going to be changing up the altar soon for Samhain. So yeah, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.